You know, one of the things that I learned a long time ago about narcissistic individuals is that they will take the battle between you and them as far as they can take it. Narcissists are really good at stirring and causing trouble, but very poor at taking responsibility and being accountable. That often leads to really rocky and untrustworthy connections within a family system, which then in turn also causes a very poor family dynamic. So in today's video, I want to talk about some of the things that you're likely to come across with a narcissistic family member in terms of, arguing with them and trying to talk things out and trying to make things right and just trying to be a decent human being. So I'm going to give you some insights on what not to do. And then I also want to briefly discuss what you're looking at if you're dealing with a narcissistic family member. But before we jump in, let me just briefly introduce myself in case you were new. My name is Tamara. I'm internationally and I'm board certified as a trauma therapist. I'm licensed in mental health. I specialize in treating children, teens, and families, as well as adults who are dealing with trauma. Let's go ahead and jump in. I talk about a narcissistic injury all the time on this channel. The psychological definition of a narcissistic injury is involving an individual who is very narcissistic, very self-centered, very egocentric, who feels that they have been threatened, demeaned, condescended, by you or by something that they feel that is associated with them. A narcissistic injury is basically my self-esteem. I wear it on my sleeves, right? I wear my self-esteem on me like pins and labels. And so if you do something to me that I feel is some kind of slight, it could be a verbal slight, an actual slight, it could be a perceived slight. It could also be something that you didn't really mean, to say that would offend them, right? You could be talking about something totally different and they will somehow relate what you're saying or doing back to them. It is an injury of the ego. And that's usually what I call it when I'm talking to my clients about narcissistic family members. A narcissistic injury can really cause a lot of damage within a family. And this mainly depends upon what kind of a narcissist that you're dealing with, right? Are you dealing with a malignant narcissist? Are you dealing with a narcissist who's really touchy? Are you dealing with a vulnerable narcissist? What are you dealing with, right? And you can learn a little bit more by going to my video here about the different kinds of narcissists that you're likely to come across. But you want to know, what kind of a narcissist am I dealing with here? And why is it that any and almost everything I say offends you? Well, it's because of that narcissistic injury. They don't like to have wounds, right? The very wounds that we try to heal with Neosporin and peroxide and Band-Aids, that's painful sometimes, right? Peroxide burns, putting a Band-Aid on a wound can sometimes be painful, and putting ointment and cleaning it out, and the list goes on, right? Well, a narcissist feels that same kind of pain when you have offended their ego. Whether it was real or perceived, right? It doesn't matter. Whatever it is that they perceive that is real, right? You have most likely offended them. And that's what a narcissistic injury is. It's invisible, right? It doesn't always make sense, and it may be quite irrational, but it's still an injury of the ego. So, what's going on here? Why do these narcissists feel the need to protect themselves and defend themselves and almost create chaos and constant confrontation in the family, right? Why does this happen? Well, I want you to keep in mind that the battlefield for a narcissist can either be empowering or intimidating. They don't want to get into an arena where they can't prove that they are worthwhile. They can't prove that they are greater than the next person. They don't want to deal with that, right? So that vulnerable narcissist over there who comes across as despondent and depressed and disengaged and, really struggling with their emotions, that kind of a narcissist, right, doesn't want to enter an arena that involves having to explain themselves, having to possibly lose the fight or the battle, right? Looking a certain way to other people, or, rumors getting spread that they said this and that. They don't want to deal with that, right? It's a little bit intimidating. But they also don't want to deal with, an arena or a situation where the other person, which would be you, is able to catch them in lies, able to really put them in a position of vulnerability. reality. They don't want that. So here's what's going on here. The minute that you confront the narcissist, the minute that you try to sit down and have a logical conversation, or you try to somehow, have this reciprocal, mutual kind of communication, the moment you do that, you're probably going to come up against an individual who's going to put up a brick wall. They're going to slam the door. They don't want to talk to you because they know something is coming. Putting up the wall, shutting the door, slamming the door is gaslighting, right? Making you feel that nothing's really going on, that it's all in your head, stonewalling, really refusing to talk no matter what, because they know that that is a place of power and authority. To be able to halt the conversation or the encounter or the confrontation is a place of power and authority, right? They don't want to deal with those kind of things. So what they do is they put up this brick wall, they hide behind it, or they say that something is wrong with you. But what gets them to that level, right, where you can't seem to get in? Well, here's a couple of things. You want to make sure that you are aware that a narcissist is often offended and hurt by any kind of threat, whether it's real or perceived. It doesn't matter. It's a threat, right? There's also this idea of feelings of inferiority or narcissistic inferiority. It's basically these internalized feelings of not being good enough and smart enough and pretty enough and handsome enough and talented enough. And they internalize those things so much that anytime you confront them or anytime you bring something to their attention, it's not that you're loving them and trying to make things work. It's that you're putting them down and you're trying to harm them. So they really do become defensive, some of them, and they have a really hard time seeing outside of their own damaged world or their own inferiorities, their own insecurities, their own needs. You also want to consider that the moment you confront or try to deal with a narcissist, you're going to be exposing their false self, right? It's basically the perceived image of who they are. They perceive themselves in a way that isn't, and they perceive themselves in a way that kind of puts them ahead of you. And so when you confront them, or above you, I should say, but when you confront them or you bring something to the table, now you're messing with their idea of who they think they are, who they want to be, right? So you're kind of pulling them out of their false self, their mental world of who they are. And so they don't like that. And so that's what usually ends up being a narcissistic injury. You're pulling off the shades, you're opening the curtains, you're saying, here's who you are. And they can't deal with that. They operate under a false self. Keep that in mind. They also have an ignited desire to defeat, to compete, and to win. They have an ignited desire to fight, to defeat, to compete, to win. Anytime you bring something to that narcissistic family member, a parent, a cousin, a father, whatever, and they're, into a confrontation with you, right? You're not getting along, you're butting heads, you feel the tension. You have to keep in mind that once that stage happens, then there's this ignited, almost like a match, right? A match strike. It's like this ignited fire within them, not all narcissists, but most of them. And they feel this need to defend, to defeat you, and to compete with you. And so you're not going to get anywhere with the narcissist who's in this frame of mind. Remember, they live in a world that is built to support their idea of who they are, right? They are in this world that's false, it's irrelevant, it's not what we're seeing on the outside. They're in this mental space that isn't a reality to everybody else. That arrogance that you may feel, that feeling of superiority that you may see in them, that uppity body language that they sometimes carry, all of that is based on the false narrative that they have created for their lives and for themselves, or what other people have created for them, because sometimes it's just strictly entitlement, right? There are narcissists who have been raised a certain way to believe that the world is for them, and so that entitlement can really take over as an adult. You want to keep in mind when dealing with a narcissistic individual, and for the purposes of this video, a narcissistic family member, that there are 4 important driving features that you want to keep in mind when you're dealing with a narcissist. One, I think that's most important, is that you have to keep in mind that the narcissist has an obsession with winning. They have an obsession with getting ahead. They have an obsession with always one-upping you and always being ahead of you and always being trickier and more calculating and more strategic than you. You want to keep that in mind. There's an obsession. An obsession is basically this constant frame of mind that is hard for that individual to come out of. It's an obsession. It's over and over and over and over all day long, every hour, every minute, every second of the day, right? So keep that in mind. They have an obsession with always being ahead. You know, they have some really uneasy communication styles, and depending on what the dynamic was with their parents or within the family system, their communication style is disruptive. I'll say disruptive. I was going to say destroyed, but for the most part, a narcissist lacks the abilities to communicate, right? They need the ability to pace the conversation. And here's a definition of pacing right here on the screen. They also need the ability to respect where you're coming from, right? So they need to have empathy. They also need to have compassion for you, respect, right? They also need to be able to put, pieces together and understand that mistakes are made and other people have feelings, and there's a lot of confusion that happened in that situation, or whatever the case. They don't have the mature and healthy communication styles needed to engage with you in a healthy and appropriate way. The other thing is that they often communicate to exhaust you. Now, a narcissist, their communication style is, often all about themselves, often about one-upping you and being above you and being ahead of you. If they are constantly in that mindset, you really have to ask yourself, is having a conversation with a narcissist even worth it? Do I really need to get into a battle of the minds, a battle of the wits? Do I really need to mince words with this individual? Because does it really matter? Because at the end of this whole thing, they've won. And they've won because that's how they perceive things, right? They've won because they've won in their mind. They've perceived themselves to be a certain way. And so that's why. Last thing, defenses are high. You want to be able to keep that in mind. Their defenses are already here as a narcissist in the first place. Their defenses are here, and you're coming in right here trying to have a conversation with them. You've already lost, right? So keep in mind, they have an obsessed kind of thought pattern or a kind of mindset about winning, being above, being ahead. The communication style is most likely unhealthy and very detrimental for you and them. And I say them because the minute you trigger them, a narcissistic injury occurs, and then this big explosion happens. You also want to keep in mind that their goal is to be above you, ahead of you, exhaust you, wear you out, win the battle, compete, defeat you, right? So these are the things that you want to keep in mind as you question yourself about whether it's not to really engage with that narcissist, especially during a confrontation. So let me give you some tips, okay? This might be helpful to you in managing that narcissistic individual. The first tip that I give you is you want to choose your battles wisely with a narcissist. The minute you decide to kind of, throw the towel in and say, let's go ahead and fight. What do you want to say to me that you've always wanted to say to me? Whenever that gets to that place, you really have to be ready to lose, because even if you have won because you've said the right things or you've done the right things or you've made sense and you felt like you were getting somewhere in that conversation, even though you feel you have won, it's the perception of the narcissist that overrules. So the perception of the narcissist dictates if you've won or not. That perception of the narcissist also dictates whether things are going to remain peaceful between the two of you, if it ever came to a compromise or some kind of place of peace, or if things are going to remain pretty tragic between the two of you. That's the defining feature for me, that I'm sitting in front of a narcissist, that no matter what happens, it's that narcissist perception of reality that really overrules everything else. So keep that in mind. So choose your battles wisely. The next thing is you want to understand the psychology of the narcissist. There's some psychology in here, and they operate based on that psychology, right? Do they have a narrative that they were abused and neglected and beat and traumatized as a child? Do they have a narrative that they are a victim, or they are superior, or they are a god? Do they have a narrative that they are the most successful person in the world and the smartest and the brightest, right? Do they have a narrative that's entitled, that I'm going to always get what I want because I'm smart, I'm beautiful, I'm talented, I'm handsome, whatever, right? So understand the psychology of that narcissist. Try to get inside of their head. And sometimes, and I think this is like an additional tip for you, sometimes you have to play the game to win the game, right? So sometimes you have to go along with the narcissist to see how far they think, to see how they feel, to see how they react, to see how they interact, right? It's only when you get into the mind and in the psychology of the narcissist that you can fully understand what you're dealing with, right? I'm sure you've seen those movies where, an individual is in a hostage situation and everybody's held hostage except for that one person who offered that person, that criminal, something to eat, something to drink, right? It's only that person who gave him a hug when he cried or listened to him talk about, his victimhood that was able to get through to him. So kind of see yourself in that own light if you're dealing with a narcissistic family member, that you want to go along to get along so that you can understand how they function, how they think, how the psychology of their mind is, and you've won then. Be ready for the critiques, the criticisms, the judgments, the rudeness, the ignorance, all of it. Be ready for it, right? The narcissist is an individual who protects their wounds, right? The narcissistic injury, don't forget that. They protect their wounds by simply blocking everything. And that avoidance technique may involve judgments, critiquing you, making you feel less than, bringing up things in your past, bringing up things that you told them in confidence, saying things a certain way, lying, deceiving, whatever, right? So be ready for all of that. Be ready for them to lie on you. Be ready for them to curtail the truth. Be ready for them to judge and critique you. This is what they do best, right? So be ready for that. That's the only way you can really protect your heart and your mind from them. Be ready and be so many miles and steps ahead. You don't want to drop lugs with narcissists. Narcissists are pretty keen sometimes when you are dropping lugs, for example, or you're dropping hints, because they're constantly on the lookout to protect their injuries, right? They don't want further injury. They don't want to feel less than, right? So, really be careful with dropping lugs, dropping hints. That's really not the way to go. So don't do that. That's the best advice I can give you. Just stay away from that arena. Keep in mind the narcissists vacillate. They vacillate between two views, right? They may value you at one moment, devalue you at another, value you one moment, devalue you at another. Ooh, that's a lot to say. But keep in mind that they vacillate back and forth between those two worlds, right? You're good, you're bad. You're good, you're bad. You're bad, you're good. This is how they function, right? So be ready for that. And narcissists who vacillate between two views of who you are, will 1 minute talk against you to certain family members, and the next minute you guys are best friends again. So make sure that you're not getting caught up in that, right? Because you could sometimes feel like, oh, I guess we're friends again. I guess we're not mad at each other, right? But in doing that, you're kind of playing the game of the narcissist. You want to push away from the table with the narcissist. You want to get off the game board. You want to get off the chessboard, and you want to be able to move forward in a healthy way. And the only way to do that is to not play the game of the narcissist. So what do you think? Can you win a battle with a narcissist at this point? I don't know. A lot of my clients aren't sure, but I encourage you to take some of these suggestions, if I can speak in some of this information, and process it for yourself. Thank you so much for being with me in today's video. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you want to get more videos like this, and stick around. I do a lot of live chats. That's what drives the statistics of my channel and all of the relationships that we have built. So I welcome you to my live chats on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. and sometimes randomly throughout the week. So stay tuned for that. Go ahead and hit that bell button so you know when those things are going to come out, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.